July 6, 1943. The Pacific, 200 miles north of the Solomon Islands. Lieutenant James Mitchell stands on the bridge of the USS Helena, watching the sky with the exhaustion that comes from 3 straight days of air raids. His anti-aircraft crew has fired 8,000 rounds in 72 hours. They've hit nothing. The math is brutal. American ships are expending an average of 2,500 shells to bring down a single Japanese aircraft, sometimes 5,000. Mitchell has done the calculation in his head during night watches. At this rate, they'll run out of ammunition before they run out targets. Then he sees them, 47 dots on the horizon, growing larger. Mitsubishi G-4M bombers, the ones the sailors call flying lighters because they explode so beautifully when you actually manage to hit them, which almost never happens. The 5-inch guns begin their familiar rhythm. Shells climb toward the bomber formation, black puffs erupting in the sky. Always too early, too late, too high, too low. Every explosion a miss. Every miss a waste. Every waste bringing them closer to defenselessness. But today, something is different. The shells are still exploding in the wrong places, nowhere near the aircraft. But the bombers are falling anyway. 1, then 3, then 7. Mitchell watches through binoculars as a Zero fighter disintegrates 200 feet away from the nearest explosion. The blast wasn't even close. The concussion couldn't have reached it. The shrapnel was scattered in the opposite direction. Yet the aircraft simply came apart. Another shell detonates, and another bomber tumbles from the sky. Except the shell burst was 50 yards ahead of the plane's flight path. Impossible. The plane flew into empty air where a shell had already exploded and ceased to exist. Within 6 minutes, 16 Japanese aircraft have fallen from the sky. The Helena's guns fired 600 rounds. Under normal circumstances, that wouldn't be enough ammunition to guarantee a single kill. Mitchell lowers his binoculars, and for the first time in 3 days, he's not exhausted. He's terrified, because what he just witnessed violates every principle of physics he understands. Shells don't explode at the right time. They explode when they're told to explode, after a set number of seconds, programmed on the deck by sweating men, turning fuses with freezing fingers, calculating altitude and speed and trajectory, and somehow always getting it wrong. But these shells knew where the planes were. These shells waited. These shells hunted. To understand why Mitchell's hands are shaking, you need to understand the math that's killing us. 1940, the Battle of Britain. German bombers cross the channel every night, and British anti-aircraft guns roar back with everything they have. It takes an average of 20,000 shells to bring down one aircraft. 20,000. The cost in ammunition alone is bankrupting the war effort. The cost in missed shots, bombers reaching their targets, is measured in burning cities. The problem isn't the guns. British artillery is among the best in the world. The problem is time. When a gunner fires at an aircraft moving 300 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, the shell takes approximately 12 seconds to reach that altitude. In 12 seconds, the aircraft has traveled almost a mile. The gunner isn't shooting at where the plane is. He's shooting at where he prays the plane will be 12 seconds from now. And the pilot, who doesn't want to die, is doing everything possible to not be there. A single degree of error means a miss of 500 feet. A calculation 1 second off means the shell explodes in empty sky while the bomber flies serenely past. The shells create beautiful, useless flowers of shrapnel that blossom and fade, decorating the air with futility. The mechanical time fuses, set by hand before firing, are doing exactly what they're designed to do. They're just designed for a war that doesn't exist anymore. They were perfected for the Western Front, where artillery fired at trenches that had the courtesy to remain stationary. They work beautifully against targets that don't move. Aircraft move, which brings us to Vannevar Bush. 1940, Washington, D.C. While London burns, Bush, the Dean of Engineering at MIT, a man with the personality of a filing cabinet and the mind of a chess grandmaster, walks into a meeting with the Secretary of War with a proposal that sounds like science fiction. He wants to create an organization that doesn't exist in the military command structure, that reports directly to the president, that has unlimited funding and authority to commandeer any scientific resource in America. He wants the power to draft scientists the way the Army drafts soldiers. He wants to merge university laboratories with military necessity, creating weapons that haven't been imagined yet to fight a war most Americans still believe they can avoid. He calls it the National Defense Research Committee. For months later, Congress quietly appropriates $5 million, equivalent to $75 million today, with almost no oversight, no specific objectives, and no requirement to explain what the money is for. It's possibly the most remarkable check ever written by the U.S. government. Build us miracles. Don't tell us how. Just make sure they work. Bush divides the problem of modern war into 17 sections, each assigned to a different team of scientists. Section T goes to Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins University. Section T's mission is simple: make shells that don't miss. The challenge is everything else. You cannot put a computer in an artillery shell. Computers in 1940 fill entire rooms. A shell experiences 20,000 times the force of gravity when fired. Any mechanical system complex enough to detect an aircraft will be instantly pulverized into dust the moment the gun fires. You need to build a brain that can survive its own birth. You need electronics that can think in milliseconds while being subjected to forces that would liquefy a human body. You need to detect a target, calculate the optimal distance, and detonate, all while spinning at 500 revolutions per second, traveling at 2,000 feet per second, with a metal detector that has to work through a metal shell. You need to do the impossible. 3 theaters, 3 desperate situations, 1 secret connecting them all. The question isn't whether it's possible. The question is, what did Lieutenant Mitchell's shells know that the Japanese pilots didn't? Silver Spring, Maryland, September 1940. The Applied Physics Laboratory doesn't exist yet. What exists is a Georgian mansion on a wooded estate, requisitioned so quickly the previous owner's furniture is still in the parlor. Merle Tuve has converted the ballroom into a laboratory. Blackboards cover walls that once displayed oil paintings. Oscilloscopes sit on mahogany tables built for dinner parties. The incongruity is perfect, a symptom of a nation trying to transform itself from peacetime to war without quite believing it's really happening. Tuve is 39 years old, 6 feet tall, with a face that looks like it's carved from the same granite as Mount Rushmore. He speaks rarely. When he does, people take notes. He's a physicist who helped split the atom, who pioneered radio wave research, who understands electromagnetic fields the way Mozart understood music. Bush didn't choose him because he's brilliant. Bush chose him because he's relentless. The Proximity Fuze, they're calling it the VT Fuze now, variable time, a name designed to confuse enemy intelligence, requires solving 4 impossible problems simultaneously. First, build a radio transmitter and receiver small enough to fit in an artillery shell. In 1940, a radio you can carry requires a backpack. A radio that can fit in a 5-inch shell casing, with the battery, the antenna, the detection circuit, the detonator, and the explosive, all in a space the size of a coffee thermos, requires inventing an entirely new category of electronics. Second, make that radio survive 20,000 G-forces. When a 5-inch gun fires, the shell experiences acceleration that would instantly kill any human, that pulverizes vacuum tubes like they're made of sugar glass, that turns solder joints into dust. The radio has to work perfectly the instant after experiencing forces that should destroy it. Third, make it detect an aircraft. The shell is spinning. The aircraft is moving. The background is the ground or the ocean, both of which reflect radio waves. The fuse has to distinguish between a bomber at 500 feet and the sea below it while completing 500 rotations per second. Fourth, make it cheap enough to mass produce. This cannot be a precision instrument crafted by specialists. It has to be something you can manufacture millions of by workers who've never built anything more complicated than a carburetor, reliable enough that you can store it in a ship's magazine for 6 months in tropical humidity, and simple enough that a sailor with frozen fingers can load it in combat without killing himself. Oh, and one more thing. solve all 4 problems in 18 months. TUV's team numbers 40 scientists in September 1940. By December, it's 200. By the following summer, nearly 800 people are working on a device that, officially, doesn't exist. The first tests are catastrophic. November 1940. Dahlgren Proving Ground, Virginia. They fire the first prototype fuse. The shell leaves the barrel, the radio activates, and then nothing. The fuse fails to detonate. They find a shell buried 3 feet underground, its electronics pulverized into metallic confetti. December 1940. They reinforce the vacuum tubes with rubber mounting. The shell fires. The fuse activates, detects the ground perfectly, and explodes while still inside the gun barrel. 3 technicians are injured. The test gun is destroyed. January 1941. They try a different approach. Miniature vacuum tubes, the smallest ever built, no larger than a fingertip. The shell survives firing. The radio activates. The fuse detects the target drone aircraft and explodes 300 feet too early. Bush's committee is losing faith. $18 million has been spent. 0 working fuses exist. Other section leaders are suggesting the project be abandoned. The mathematics are impossible. The engineering is fantasy. Perhaps some problems don't have solutions. Tuve doesn't argue. He goes back to the laboratory. February 1941. The breakthrough comes not from engineering, but from physics. A young researcher named Ralph Baldwin is staring at oscilloscope readings, watching the pattern of radio waves bouncing back from a test aircraft. Something is wrong with the frequency. The returning waves don't match the transmitted waves. They're compressed, squeezed together, the peaks coming faster than they should. Baldwin recognizes it immediately. He's seeing the Doppler effect. When an ambulance races toward you, its siren sounds higher-pitched than when it races away. The motion compresses or stretches the sound waves. The same principle applies to radio waves. When an aircraft moves toward a radar transmitter, the reflected waves return at a higher frequency than what was sent. And that frequency shift, that beautiful, predictable distortion of waves, can tell you not just that something is there, but how fast it's approaching. Baldwin's insight gives them a solution to the most intractable problem. They don't need to measure distance anymore. They need to measure velocity. The shell doesn't need to know where the plane is. It needs to know when the plane is getting closer. They redesign the circuit around this principle. The fuse transmits a radio wave. The wave bounces off the aircraft. The receiver measures the frequency shift. When that shift reaches a specific threshold, when the rate of approach indicates the target is approximately 70 feet away, the circuit closes, the detonator fires, and the shell explodes. 70 feet. Close enough that shrapnel becomes 1,000 lethal fragments, each capable of tearing through aluminum skin, through fuel tanks, through human bodies. Far enough that the bomber can't evade it. August 1941. Chesapeake Bay. The USS Cleveland, a destroyer converted to a test platform, fires a single 5-inch shell equipped with a redesigned fuse at a radio-controlled drone aircraft. The drone approaches at 200 miles per hour, 10,000 feet altitude. The shell climbs. The radio activates. The signal bounces off the drone's metal fuselage. The frequency shift reaches threshold. 73 feet from the target, the shell detonates. The drone disintegrates. On the deck of the Cleveland, Merle Tuve watches through binoculars. When the drone explodes, he lowers the binoculars slowly. His face shows no emotion. He turns to his assistant and says, in his characteristic monotone, "I believe that will be satisfactory." It's possibly the greatest understatement in the history of weapons development. The proximity fuse works. But now comes the harder problem, keeping it secret. The weapon you've invented is only as powerful as your ability to keep it secret. If the enemy knows it exists, they could develop countermeasures. They can build aircraft with radar-absorbing materials. They can jam the radio frequencies. They can capture a dud shell, reverse engineer the fuse, and build their own. So the VT Fuze becomes the most protected secret of World War II after the atomic bomb. Security measures are pathological. Scientists working on the project aren't allowed to tell their families what they do. Components are manufactured by different companies, none of which knows what they're building. The fuse is assembled in one location, but no single worker assembles an entire unit. You solder connections without knowing what they connect to. You test circuits without knowing what they're testing. The fuse's very existence is compartmentalized. Navy officers firing them in combat aren't told how they work. Many don't even know they're firing a new type of ammunition. They're just told to load shells marked with a red band and not ask questions. And there's a second reason for secrecy, darker than the first. The fuse will absolutely, definitely save Allied lives. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. But if you use it over land, the Germans will find a dud. They'll study it. They'll copy it. And then they'll load it into their V weapons and aim it at London. The V, one flying bomb, Hitler's revenge weapon, begins falling on Britain in June 1944. It's a primitive cruise missile, a bomb with wings and a pulse jet engine, launched from ramps in occupied France. It carries a 1-ton warhead. It flies at 400 miles per hour, and it's aimed at civilian populations. The V-1 is terror as weapon. It makes a distinctive buzzing sound as it approaches. You hear it. You wait. And when the engine cuts out, you know you have approximately 15 seconds before impact. The silence becomes a countdown to death. Between June and October 1944, over 9,500 V-1s are launched at London. Nearly 6,200 reach the British coast. They kill 6,184 civilians. They wound 17,981 more. Entire neighborhoods vanish overnight. The British throw everything they have at the V-1 problem. Fighter aircraft chase the bombs, trying to shoot them down before they reach population centers. Anti-aircraft guns line the coast in what they call the diver box, Operation Diver being the code name for V-1 defense. And the guns are loaded with proximity fuses. The results are almost obscene. Without proximity fuses, anti-aircraft guns destroy approximately 24% of V-1s that come within range. An acceptable but not decisive success rate. With proximity fuses, the success rate climbs to 79%. By August 1944, British gunners are shooting down 3 out of every 4 V-1s that approach London. The bombs that were supposed to break British morale are instead falling into the Channel, in empty fields, into abandoned buildings evacuated for exactly this purpose. The proximity fuse is saving London. But Churchill's military advisors are arguing, furiously, desperately, that Britain cannot use these weapons over land on the continent, cannot risk the Germans capturing one, cannot give Hitler's engineers the blueprint for making his V-weapons exponentially more lethal. So a rule is established, and it's absolute. Proximity fuses can be used over water. Over the Pacific, where ships fight aircraft and dud shells sink to the ocean floor. Over the English Channel, where V-1s fall into currents that carry duds away from German salvage teams. But never, under any circumstances, over land where German forces could recover them. The men at the front don't know this. Infantry pinned down by German artillery don't know that there's a weapon that could save them, but command won't release it because of strategic calculations they're not clear to understand. And then winter comes. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The weakest point in the Allied line. Hitler has been planning for months. While Allied intelligence convinces itself the war is nearly won, German forces are massing in secret. 200,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, 1,900 artillery pieces. They're preparing the largest German offensive of the war's final year, an attack designed to split Allied forces, recapture the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace before the Soviets reach Berlin. It will be called the Battle of the Bulge. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. German artillery opens fire along an 80-mile front. The barrage is apocalyptic, 2,000 guns firing simultaneously. American forward positions are obliterated. Communications are severed. Command loses contact with entire divisions. Then the panzers come. American forces fall back. The carefully planned Allied advance reverses into desperate defense. Towns are retaken by Germans who were supposed to be defeated. Supply lines are cut. Battalions are surrounded. And then the weather turns. For 8 days, the Ardennes is buried under fog and snow. The clouds sit at 200 feet. Allied air superiority, the overwhelming advantage that's been grinding German forces into dust since D-Day, becomes worthless. You cannot bomb what you cannot see. Fighters sit grounded on airfields while ground forces bleed. General Patton's Third Army is racing north to relieve the surrounded 101st Airborne at Bastogne. But his advance is slowed by German artillery that his own artillery cannot suppress. The math that plagued British gunners in 1940 is plaguing American gunners now. Shells explode too early, too late, while German guns continue firing. Patton's headquarters makes the request through official channels. Release the VT Fuses for use over land. The debate reaches Eisenhower's desk. On one side, the very real possibility that a dud falls into German hands is reverse engineered and gives Hitler's engineers the ability to create V-weapons that are functionally unstoppable. London could face a second blitz, but this time with weapons that don't miss. On the other side, American soldiers dying in snow-covered foxholes because artillery support is shooting at ghosts. Eisenhower considers the strategic picture. German industry is collapsing. Their rail networks are bombed to rubble. Their cities are burning. Even if they capture a fuse, even if they reverse engineer it, they lack the manufacturing capacity to produce them in meaningful numbers. The German war machine is in its death throes. The Americans, meanwhile, are producing 40,000 proximity fuses per day. December 22, 1944. Eisenhower signs the order. Release the fuses. Use them over land. Give Patton everything he needs. The most protected secret of World War II is about to become the most public demonstration of American scientific supremacy. And in snow-covered forests along the German border, soldiers who don't know they're about to witness a revolution are about to learn what happens when physics goes to war. December 24, 1944. Christmas Eve. The Ardennes Forest. Oberstfreiter Klaus Weber, a composite of 3 German soldiers whose accounts survived the war, is manning an 88mm anti-aircraft gun repurposed as field artillery. His crew has held this position for 6 days, shelling American forces attempting to break through to Bastogne. They've been extraordinarily effective. American casualties are mounting. The weather remains their greatest ally. Fog so thick you can barely see 50 meters, which means American aircraft remain grounded. Weber is 23 years old. He's fought in Russia, France, and now Belgium. He understands the mathematics of survival. Keep your head down, keep the gun firing, and trust that the Americans still haven't learned that massed infantry advances into artillery positions are suicide. At 1,430 hours, the American counterbattery fire begins. This is routine. American artillery fires back at German positions constantly. Weber and his crew have learned to recognize the sound of incoming shells, to judge their trajectory by the whistle, to know whether to take cover or keep firing. They've survived 8 months of combat through this expertise. The first shells arrive exactly as expected. Weber hears the familiar shriek. The shells pass overhead and explode in the air 200 meters beyond their position. A miss. The Americans are overshooting. Weber's crew keeps firing. Then the second salvo arrives. The shells don't pass overhead this time. They detonate directly above the German position, 75 feet in the air, and the world becomes shrapnel. This is wrong. This isn't how artillery works. Shells explode on contact with the ground. They don't detonate in midair unless the fuse is set for airburst. And if the Americans had set their fuses for airburst at this specific altitude, the first salvo wouldn't have overshot. It's as if the shells are choosing when to explode. The third salvo confirms what Weber's mind refuses to accept. The shells adjust. They detonate at the optimal height for maximum lethality, creating a cone of supersonic steel fragments that shred everything below. His gun position, carefully dug into a defensive position that protects against ground impacts, becomes a killing zone. Shrapnel tears through sandbags like tissue paper. The protection they've trusted for 6 days is suddenly worse than useless. They're in a bold design to catch the fragments raining from above. Weber's loader is killed instantly. His gunner loses an arm. The 88mm gun is perforated with holes that make it look like steel lace. And shells keep coming. For 30 minutes, American artillery delivers what will later be described as the most precise and lethal barrage of the European theater. Shells that detonate at the exact altitude to maximize casualties. No wasted shots. No shells burying themselves harmlessly in frozen ground. Every explosion a perfectly positioned kill zone. German positions that have held for a week collapse in minutes. Weber survives because he abandons his gun and runs, something he's never done before, something that would normally mean court-martial, except there's no longer anyone to court-martial him. His unit has ceased to exist. Later, when he's captured by advancing American forces, Weber tries to explain what happened. The translator doesn't understand. Artillery exploded. Men died. This is war. What's unusual about that? Weber struggles to find the words. Finally, he says in broken English, "The shells knew where we were." The translator writes this down as combat stress. Battle fatigue. The Americans have seen it before. Soldiers convinced that weapons are intelligent, that they're being hunted by machines. Except this time, the soldier is right. What Weber experienced, what thousands of German soldiers experienced across the Ardennes that Christmas, was the proximity fuse deployed at scale over land for the first time. The impact is immediate and devastating. German artillery positions that have been suppressing American advances are located and destroyed within hours. German armor, previously protected by fog that prevents American air reconnaissance, is targeted by artillery that doesn't need to see them. The shells detect the metal, measure the approach rate, and detonate at optimal height. A Tiger tank has thick armor that can shrug off direct hits. But a proximity fuse shell detonating 10 meters above, it sends shrapnel through the open commander's hatch, through vision ports, through the vulnerable engine deck. The tank crews learn to seal every opening, which makes the tanks nearly blind, which makes them vulnerable to infantry with bazookas. The Germans call them posit shells. Their intelligence has identified the fuse designation from capture documents. They spread rumors about the weapons, rumors that grow into mythology. The shells that follow you. The shells that know. The shells that wait for you to emerge from cover before exploding. The mythology isn't quite accurate, but the terror is entirely real. By December 27th, just 3 days after the fuses are released for ground use, German offensive momentum has stalled. The combination of clearing weather, which brings back Allied air superiority, and the proximity fuse, which makes German artillery positions and armor concentrations unsustainable, transforms the battlefield. Patton's Third Army breaks through to Bastogne on December 26th. The corridor is held open by artillery that doesn't miss. German counterattacks are shattered by air bursts that turn every advance into a killing field. The Battle of the Bulge continues until January 25th, 1945, but the outcome is no longer in doubt after Christmas. The German offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied forces, fails. The Wehrmacht will never again launch a major offensive operation. General Patton, not known for praising technology, writes in his diary, "The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. The Germans are deathly afraid of it." He's right about the fear. German intelligence reports from January 1945 describe Wehrmacht morale collapsing specifically because of the proximity fuse. Soldiers refuse to occupy positions that might be targeted by American artillery. Officers cannot keep men in the open. The psychological impact exceeds even the tactical effectiveness. This is warfare transformed by science. But the transformation is only beginning. The proximity fuse's final statistics are almost absurd. By war's end, American industry has produced 22 million proximity fuses. The cost per fuse drops from $732 in 1942 to $18 by 1945, cheaper than a standard mechanical time fuse, while being infinitely more effective. In the Pacific, ships equipped with proximity fuses improve their anti-aircraft kill rates by 300%. Japanese kamikaze attacks, the desperate tactic of using the aircraft itself as a guided missile, become exponentially more dangerous for the pilots. Before proximity fuses, 48% of kamikaze aircraft reach their targets. After proximity fuses, that rate drops to 16%. The mathematical impact is straightforward. The proximity fuse saves ammunition, ships, and lives in quantities that are difficult to calculate, but certainly number in the tens of thousands. But the strategic impact is more profound. The proximity fuse demonstrates that scientific research, properly organized, properly funded, properly integrated with military necessity, can create weapons that change the fundamental nature of warfare within months rather than decades. Vannevar Bush's model of mobilizing university researchers, of creating partnerships between academia and military, of funding high-risk projects with minimal oversight. This model becomes the template for American weapons development for the next 80 years. The Manhattan Project uses the same organizational structure. So does radar development. So does the jet engine program. The entire American military-industrial complex, for better and worse, traces its lineage to Bush's 1940 meeting with the Secretary of War. And the proximity fuse itself never becomes obsolete. It evolves. Modern air defense missiles use proximity fuses with laser and radar detection. The Patriot missile system that shoots down ballistic missiles detonates based on proximity sensing. Anti-tank rounds use magnetic proximity fuses to detonate above armor. Even the humble airbag in your car uses a proximity sensor, detecting impact and calculating deployment timing in milliseconds, based on principles pioneered in Maryland in 1941. The artillery shell that Lieutenant Mitchell watched on the USS Helena in 1943, the shell that seemed to hunt aircraft, is the ancestor of every smart weapon in the modern arsenal. Every missile that adjusts its flight path. Every bomb that guides itself to a target. Every defense system that engages threats automatically. The line is direct. Merle Tuve returned to physics after the war. He helped design the radio telescopes that map the structure of the Milky Way. He never spoke publicly about the proximity fuse until the 1960s, when enough time had passed that secrecy no longer mattered. When asked about his war work, he said, "We built something that saved lives by taking them more efficiently. I'm not sure that's something to be proud of, but I'm certain it was necessary." Vannevar Bush went on to write the report Science, The Endless Frontier, which created the National Science Foundation and established the principle that government should fund basic research. His vision of American scientific supremacy through institutional investment shaped the Cold War and beyond. The proximity fuse was declassified in 1945. The Japanese learned about it from American newspapers. German engineers, interrogated after the war, admitted they'd been working on similar technology but abandoned it as too complex. The Soviets studied captured fuses and incorporated the technology into their own weapons. But by then, the Americans had moved on, because the lesson of the proximity fuse wasn't the specific technology. The lesson was that the impossible becomes possible when you properly motivate genius. And America had learned that lesson very, very well.